I would like to thank first of all IVSA and the Pillars Global Academy for giving me the opportunity to present this PPT in front of you. And secondly, I would like to emphasize two things before we start this lecture. The first thing I would like to share with you is that what these two things I believe in are. First thing is that there is no such thing as a silly question. So I would like to encourage the participants during this session to open up their minds and think whatever they can about the process of treatment of wastewater. And if anything comes to their mind, they can feel free to ask me at any time, even during the lecture or after the lecture we have a session. I would love to interact with you on these topics and I will try my best to answer your questions. And the second thing I wanted to say was that there is nobody who knows everything, including me. So if there's some things which I might not be knowing, I will try to get back to you on this at a later time. But I will certainly answer your queries that you can be completely assured of. So we will start the lecture officially now. The topic of the lecture is for today is between wastewater to water. So what does that mean is that I will try to describe you the treatment of wastewater process and how do we achieve the water quality which is required to convert a wastewater effluent into a water quality which can be possible for even discharge into a drinking water source. Okay, so we can start. The next slide, please. Okay, so let me just first emphasize about the need for this. Water crisis in India, or you can call it the great water thirst. Okay, so in India we have around 18% of the global population, but we only have around 4% of the water resources. So the disparity is quite huge. You can understand that. So we have to manage with this 4% for all our needs, be it agriculture, be it industries, be it domestic use, be it some of the recreational activities, be it something else. We have to manage with this 4%. So that's why we need some technologies like rainwater harvesting or something like that, something like those, so that we can manage. But that's another aspect. If we come to the next topic, there are 600 million people in India, that is around 50% of our population, which live in water stress. Water stress means that they don't have the availability of water near to them, and even the basic necessities like water for drinking and daily household activities are far-fetched to them. They are not able to access, they don't have the access to such things at a easier level. So that's a great problem actually, I would say. Now, if there are for our Indian people, the majority of the water does not come from rivers or lakes like in Mumbai. For the rural population, the major source of the water is groundwater. If we go to our villages, the water always tastes a little odd. That's because it's groundwater. It contains minerals and etc. and all that, but it's groundwater. So our population is entirely dependent on their groundwater. Only a small percent of our population gets water from lakes or rivers, like in Mumbai. So we don't feel the pinch, but they certainly do. Okay, and now you can see that almost 1/3 of our districts are in critical condition. They don't have sufficient groundwater table. That is because of overdrawing of water or mismanagement of water. The groundwater table has to be replenished. If you are doing deforestation or if you are building all the concrete, then there is no seepage of water back into the soil. So the groundwater cannot get replenished. That leads to a decrease in the quantity. So that's what problems are there in the rural areas. If you come to the reality aspects, in Rajasthan itself, rural women has to walk around. Saying was that rural women in India, in Rajasthan itself, they have to walk around average of 2.5 kilometers just to reach the water resource. So one trip a woman can carry max to max 2 buckets of water, I think 20-30 liters of water. So if they have to walk 2.5 kilometers just for 30 liters of water, imagine the quantity required for a day and how they are managing their lives. The water scarcity. It's a very devastating, it's a very serious situation actually, if you think about it. Young girls in those areas are denied education. They cannot go to schools because they have to fetch water for drinking. Young students of your age, basically cannot go to their schools just because they have to fill water. So you can imagine the seriousness of the situation. What will happen to those future of those little children? So I think something should has to be done. Government is doing, but it will take some time. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about domestic water pollution in India. Okay, so if we talk about quantity, it's about the city quantity. We generate around 30,000 million liters, 13,000 million liters of sewage every day just in our cities. Okay, and out of that, we have the capacity to treat only 6,000 million liters. So the remaining 23,000 million liters, I'm telling, that is just being disposed untreated. Either it's being discharged into the water bodies, or it's being discharged somewhere in the rivers, somewhere in the sea, or anything, but it's not treated. So that water causes pollution to the water body, to the sea, to the lake, to the pond, anywhere it's discharged, even the soil, it will lead to a huge amount of problem for that particular environment. You can see that more than 80% of our fresh water is currently not suitable for drinking, actually, because people dump their wastes. As you can see in the images also, see this, that woman is taking drinking water actually in the first image. That's drinking water, and she has to fill it from that kind of a location. You can imagine the quality of the water that she's getting. Okay. You can see that in the next image, there is a dumping of sewage, indiscriminate dumping of sewage into the rivers. That's untreated wastewater. If that kind of an effluent is dumped in the water body, you can imagine the damage it will cause to the environment over there. Similarly, people dumping their waste indiscriminately. Even if you go to the seas, you will find some amount of plastic flowing in there. Even if you go to a lake or something, like in Ganpati, you see there is a lot of flowers which are dumped in the ponds. There are a lot of waste dumped in the rivers. If you go to Mithi Nadi, you can see that the whole part of the river is filled with waste. It's public waste. It's not done by anybody else, but done by people like us. So you also are responsible partly for this problem which the water bodies are facing. In India itself, 1.5 million children die of diarrhea every year. So that's not something to be proud of. So people itself should be aware not to pollute. We should be aware that government should not directly dispose the waste in these kinds of water bodies. We have to be aware of these things, and we have to take it into our hand that this can be avoided. Okay. So the next slide, please. Similar to the government, there are also industries. If you talk about a businessman, their main aim is always to earn profit. Social responsibility is there, but the profit earning is their main goal. So in India, as we're a developing country, we are moving towards the development. There are a lot of industries coming up every day. New industrial belts are developing every day. Now also in Gujarat, there are many companies, many industries being established. So the more number of industries, the more amount of the water generated. So if this continues, it's a problem basically, not because the industrial development, but because they are not that serious about the treatment of wastewater. In India, the mentality, I can tell you from my experience, is that the treatment of wastewater is just a compulsion for them. It's not a responsibility or something they are doing willingly. A very few handful of industries are there which are actually taking this seriously and are inclined to treat water as a part of their core values. Otherwise, for majority of the industries, it's just a compulsion that they have to do it. So if there's a compulsion, understand that somebody doing something willingly and somebody doing something forcefully, there is a wide margin in the efficiency they will achieve. So that's what is happening. Many industries are also inclined to dump their water directly into the rivers. If you even go to, like I said, Mithi Nadi, in the Ulasnagar belt, if you go, the industrial belt, every kilometer, the quality of water changes. Every kilometer, you'll find a water of a new color. So it's not funny, but it's very serious thing because the amount of pollution in that river is alarming. not just to the water body, but to the people living near that bed. Okay, as you can see these images also, there's a dumping, the color of the water has changed. You can see this foam, it's a river body. Even I think you must have seen the news a day before yesterday. In Chhat Puja, in the banks of Yamuna, in the banks of Ganga, there were a lot of people bathing, but the water was filled with foam. That was industrial foam, some similar to the image where that person is bathing. Okay, if it's not for a religious practice, will anybody be?
We are starting the actual match.
Can you mute your mics, please? Okay. So you can see that the amount of pollution in the water is alarming, but still people due to religious beliefs, they just go in there. But what harm will it cause to their bodies in the long run? You cannot even imagine. Okay, so this is a very serious situation. Then if you go just for the records, the CPCB, the Pollution Control Board of India, they have, if you go to the records, almost all the rivers in India are polluted. It includes major rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, Godavari, Krishna, etc. But there are 351 river bodies which are polluted in India. So it's alarming. Okay, so you come to the next slide. So let's describe about the domestic wastewater. So the domestic wastewater basically comes in three aspects. It's either black water or gray water. You can classify it into two things. The water used for toilet, which is urine and feces, and the flush water is called as black water or sewage. And the water used for washing, bathing, kitchen, it's called gray water. The difference simply is that black water is a little more difficult to handle, more difficult to treat. It contains more pathogens and more organic matter, while the gray water is lighter fraction. It's easy to treat and it is much more suitable for applications if treated properly. Okay. Now the next image are given some parameters. It will not go into the details of the parameters, but simply for telling you like these are some criteria by which we judge the quality of water, whether it's suitable for drinking or not. Like if we say a person is tall, we measure the height in centimeters or in meters. If we say he's fat, we measure his weight in kgs. So everything has a certain parameters which have to be measured properly so that we can determine the quality or the quantity of the same. So for wastewater, there are parameters like COD, BOD, or then there are parameters nitrogen, there are salts, there are dissolved solids, and etc. And all these have to be within a certain limits. So the water can be easily or acceptably discharged into the water body. This is what it is. Can you go to the next slide, please? Ashlesh, can you go to the next slide? Okay. Similarly, there is also for industrial water bodies. Industrial wastewater depends completely on the type of industry, basically. The quality of the water will be completely different from the industry because every industry have different processes. They have different chemicals which they are using. They have different raw materials which they are using. So the quality of water varies significantly from industry to industry. A typical type of industry might not have the same type of effluent of a nearby industry. That's the variation which you will find. And the parameters are way above the normal parameters. If you check the fourth column, the COD itself, you can see that in the last column I have given a sewage for comparison. The sewage has a COD of around 1800 or something like that. But same for the distillery is 1,20,000. So that is the amount of pollution they're generating. The same for textile is little less, around 2,000. But you can see the amount of variation in that single parameter. So that's the amount of variation which we'll find in this kind of industries. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. We'll not go much in this. Okay. So if you talk about the process of wastewater treatment, the steps involved completely depend on the effluent and the industry and what is the discharge norms for that industry. If they want to discharge a particular criteria, they'll meet the criteria with whatever steps they can. The same goes for sewage, the same goes for the industrial effluent. The process is same, just some steps are added or some steps are removed, depending on the end user requirement. Okay. So the steps are basically collection of water, a preliminary treatment, a primary treatment, a secondary treatment, a tertiary treatment, and finally discharge or reuse. So the next slide, please. And now I will describe you the basic steps of treatment involved in the industries. Okay, so this treatment, specifically preliminary treatment, is mostly done for the sewage water. Uh, when the water comes in bulk, these kinds of steps help in reducing the initial load. So there's steps like screening, grit removing, and gravity settling. So what happens in these steps is that basically the water contains some amount of stones, some pollutants, some plastics. Some amount of the sewage water will not be only purely water. It will contain some amount of garbage which has been dumped in the water. So the requirement of screening is to remove that garbage. So you can see the first image. That's a screen. It's a bar screen and it has a conveyor belt. You can see on the belt there are some things like tires, plastics, etc. There are some branches coming in the stream itself. So to remove all that, this kind of technology is being employed. The second image is a grit remover. Basically, what happens is that the water is being settled in a cone, and the grit which comes is being removed, and the water then goes for further treatment. Okay, gravity settling and grit removal is the same step. They just allow the water to settle, and the effluent and water is separated. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now come to the primary treatment. Primary treatment is an important step in certain industries. It's not usually done for sewage wastewater because it doesn't have much amount of solids. Okay, so the primary treatment basically involves two steps. It is coagulation and flocculation. So what happens in coagulation is that you add certain amount of certain chemicals like alum or like ferrous sulfate, etc., to make the particles heavier. Okay, in the water contains two kinds of particles. If you take a raw water sample and you mix some mud in the sample, you will find two kinds of impurities in the sample. One will be the particles which are suspended, small particles, and one will be some particles which are dissolved in the water, which we cannot remove physically. So to remove the suspended particles from the water, we do kinds of treatment like primary treatment. So you add some coagulants like alum or ferrous, aluminum or ferrous, and then you add a flocculant. Flocculant is usually something called as polyelectrolyte, which binds the particles together. Flocculant coagulation creates the particle, and flocculant binds the particle, and then you settle those particles by gravity settling in the next step, and the water you can take for further treatment. The next slide, please. Now the secondary treatment. Like I said, the water contains majority kind of impurities. The simple impurities can be removed by primary treatment, but the rest are removed by secondary treatment. Secondary treatment usually involves a process called as biological treatment. It's completely done by bacteria or microorganisms. Okay, so the microbes, you basically consider the water as a food, and they survive on that food and they treat the effluent. It's a simple logic in that. Okay, so the requirement of biological treatment is to remove pollutants like COD, BOD, color, etc. Okay, so the next slide, please. So there are two kinds of biological treatment in secondary treatment. It can be done either in anaerobic conditions or in aerobic conditions. Okay, in aerobic you provide oxygen. In anaerobic you don't provide the oxygen. It's as simple as that. Nothing rocket science about it. It's only that. Okay, so there are different kinds of processes for different effluent. In aerobic there is acute sludge, MBBR, SBR, MBR. If you want, you can note this slide and you can go in details about this later. I will not go in depth in that because it will become too technical for you. And anaerobic treatment, you have USBR, you have AHR, you have CSTR. These are all reactors, but basically they all contain bacteria and other microorganisms which are used for degrading of the effluent. It's as simple as that. Okay, anaerobic processes produce something called as biogas, which is used as a fuel for the generation of electricity or as a power source. Okay, but aerobic process, the advantage is that it is faster and it is very easy to maintain that process. Okay, compared to the anaerobic process. So the next slide, please. Now we come to the tertiary treatment. So what is tertiary treatment? In primary treatment, to remove the solids, okay, which was suspended in the mat, so which was suspended. In secondary treatment, what we did is we removed the organic pollutants like COD and BOD, the organic matter in the water. That was removed. Okay. In tertiary treatment, we usually polish the water. After secondary treatment, the water has to be polished before it can be discharged. So the tertiary treatment, there are many steps. Like there are many possibilities you can do. There is simple filtration via MGF and ACF. It's sand and carbon filter. Or you can do an MBR process via ultrafiltration, or you can go for nanofiltration. You can go for reverse osmosis. These kinds of things are available for tertiary treatment. But what you will use completely depends on what is the demand for the end user. If the water simply has to be discharged, it's a sewage water, they basically do simple steps like sand and carbon filtration. Okay. If you want to reuse the water, some industries like textile industries, they reuse their water for treatment. Okay. So what they do in the reuse is that they will treat the water and then they will take it back to the process. So it effectively reduces the quantity of water that they require in the factory, because water comes at a cost. If you want to buy the water from the government, you have to pay some amount to them. But if you reuse the same water, the amount to be paid is less. That's why they go for the technologies. So the first image you can see is a simple sand and carbon filter. Basically, it's like a drum which is filled with sand of different grades, and water is injected in that sand filter, and the sand basically absorbs the surface, absorbs the small particles which might not be directly removed. So basically it polishes the water, and carbon filter removes something like odor or some chemicals which might be present in the water, and finally it can be discharged after disinfection. Okay. In MBR, the second process is MBR. Basically, you can see in that brown reactor, there is a white membrane in the middle part, MBR tank. Okay, so that is a ultrafiltration membrane. What that does is that it's a fine cloth-like membrane, which is a very small pore size. So you apply suction or a pressure on that membrane, and it sucks the water, but only sucks the water. The solid particles are not sucked because the pore size is very less. It's like, you know, when we take some tea and we filter in a tea strainer, the tea strainer allows the tea to come out, but doesn't allow the tea leaves to come out. That's a simple logic you can use to understand this MBR filtration process. Just the strainer size is very fine. That's why only the water comes out and all the solids are separated. It's a simple analogy for that. The next slide, please. So then we come to nanofiltration and reverse osmosis. So what is nanofiltration? It's similar to ultrafiltration. Just the membrane is even more tight. Okay. So the particles which will get filtered are even more smaller. Even more particles will get, pushed back and will not come in the fresh water. So that's a more advanced level of filtration. And lastly, there is RO. Okay, RO is something which is very common to us now. Even most of our houses have RO units over there. So basically, what is RO? You must have seen the experiment for osmosis in your labs when we put some raw kishmish in the water and it swells up in the morning. Okay, so that is simple osmosis, where the water from a low concentration goes to a higher concentration part. Okay, through a small membrane, a semi-permeable membrane. But what we do in reverse osmosis is that the water which was in the higher concentration part, we apply pressure to it. When we apply an external pressure to the water instead of going in goes to the other side, goes to the side where the solid content is less, the dissolved solid is less. RO is basically used to remove the TDS. Okay, up till now, all the things like MBR or nanofiltration, they were all for removing solid suspended matters. But the RO process is used for removing dissolved solids. If you dissolved a spoonful of salt or sugar in the water, for removing that, you have to use RO. That's the simple logic you can understand. Okay, so the water is passed through high pressure to a membrane, and because of that, the water, fresh water, comes to separate outlet, and the water which will contain the solid goes to a separate outlet. It's as simple as that. Okay. The next slide, please. Okay. So if I give a simple analogy of the filtration steps, you can see that in microfiltration, in the first image, if you focus, there are a lot of things which can pass through that. The water contains many things. It contains bacteria, it contains some oil, some macromolecules, some viruses, some proteins, some compounds, some ions. Okay. So every step, the efficiency increases in filtration. In microfiltration, you remove all kinds of bacteria, big molecules, and colloids. In After you go for microfiltration, the water might contain some viruses, proteins, and smaller molecules, small compounds, and ions. But if you, from ultrafiltration, if you go to nanofiltration, it will remove those small viruses and proteins. Only some small compounds and ions will pass through ultrafiltration. And nanofiltration even removes those small compounds, and only some small ions like sodium ions or chloride ions that pass through nanofiltration. Like I said, only some small dissolved solids can escape nanofiltration and go up to reverse osmosis, and those are removed in the reverse osmosis membrane. The ions are all removed, and you get clear water of very low TDS and solid content. Okay, so RO is currently RO is the best technology that we have for treating water. But you cannot directly put a raw effluent in the RO unit, or the membrane will get damaged. You have to pass it through the primary, secondary, and tertiary stages so that the effective load on the membrane is reduced. Because as you go, these steps are very expensive. The main problem of implementing a technology is the cost. Okay, so RO filtration, ultrafiltration, and nanofiltration, these things are very expensive. Okay, so not everybody can afford them, and that's why those people who require them absolutely, they have to reuse their water, or they have no other option. Only they prefer to go for these technologies, either ultrafiltration, either nanofiltration, or they can go for RO. But that's completely dependent on their own needs of the water. The below image, the second image, is what a nanofiltration or a RO filtration unit looks like. Those white tubes are called pressure tubes. You put the membrane in those tubes, and then you pass water through the tubes in a high pressure. The pressure is 20-30 kgs. The atmospheric pressure in which we live, the pressure is almost 20 times higher than that pressure. Okay, so that amount of pressure you have to apply to the water, and then it will pass through the membranes, and the solids will be removed. So this is the last of the treatment. Next slide, please, Aslisha. Okay, so that was the end of the treatment technologies. So now what can we do as a citizen? Okay, that comes in. What is our role? Because what I explained over here, these things cannot be done by a single person. This can either be done by an industry, or by the government, or by some very powerful persons. Not everybody like us can do it. I cannot apply a big scale RO unit at my house. Max to max I can afford is a small unit for my drinking water needs. So what can we do? As a citizen, we can spread the awareness about water pollution. The more people are aware about it, more people are aware about the norms. Because if you ask normal people, they are not aware that there are some criteria which have to be met for the water to be disposed in the environment. They are not aware that water pollution is a serious problem. They might be aware, but they are not that sensitized about it. They don't think about it in a detailed manner. and they are just aware it's something, but they don't have the correct idea of the extent of the problem. So spreading awareness is something which can be done as a normal citizen. As students, you can spread awareness about it, because the more people are aware, the more they will, try to prevent it. Then you can make sure to purchase the products from industries which are environmentally responsible, because industrial pollution is a big problem. Their aim is to make profit, but if they cannot make profit, then there is no point of starting the industry. So that, and the purchasing power is ultimately at the consumer level. We are the ones which are the consumers. We have to buy the products at last. So if we are not buying products from an industry which pollutes, the industry will shut down automatically. So they have to, then they will be forced to make those things available at that location, so that they can treat the water and be responsible for their own water. That's what we can do. Now, in the Indian scenario, if I say, the companies which are big companies like Pepsi, I'll not take names, but big companies, big MNCs, they are very responsible. They take their effluent seriously. Big companies, they are responsible. The multinational companies, they take their water more seriously compared to the local companies. But if we apply more pressure, they will certainly be aware that okay, we have to maintain the water, and the small companies also will be in that action, and they will try to implement technologies, and that will increase the amount of water which is treated and reduce the pollution. Okay. Thirdly, what we can do as a citizen is that we can try to actively pollute water bodies. If it's also a part of awareness. If people are aware that they don't have to pollute, they will not pollute. If we have to prevent people from directly throwing their waste in the gutter, directly polluting the water bodies, directly, like in rural areas, they directly throw their things in the river bodies. That we have to prevent. If that can be prevented, then the water pollution will automatically come down. Okay. Then, like I said, the next point is also about awareness. The authorities have to be responsible. It's not like there are no authorities responsible, or no people are not aware. The government is not aware. The government is aware, but the implementation of the action is at a very slow rate compared to the extent of pollution. The extent of the action by the government is very slow. So we have to emphasize on that if the political pressure is there, then obviously that the people will not pollute. The people will treat the water seriously, and the extent of pollution will reduce, and the environment will be safer. Okay. Then last thing what we can do is that societies can treat their water. Okay. That's something which is possible. The sewage water down by societies is treatable at their own location. You cannot completely rely on the government for doing everything, because there is a lack of liter of water which is for treating all that water at a particular single location. So if the societies can come together, they can put up a small unit, and they can treat their own water and then discharge it. So the load on the major treatment facility comes down. So they can achieve more efficient treatment. That's something which can be done. Like solid waste composting can be done at a local level. Even the water management can be done at a local level. Not all of it, but a part of it can certainly be treated at a society level. That is something which is possible. That can be done as a citizen. Okay. So the next slide, please. With this, I conclude the presentation, and I would like to thank you for being a good audience. And I would also like to thank the committee of IVSA and MES Academy for allowing me the opportunity. So now I will like to open the session to any question and answers, either from the panel or from the participants. Please feel free to ask me. Like I said earlier, there are no silly questions, and I will try to answer my best to your queries. Okay.